We're reading this morning from Matthew 2, verses 1 to 12 in the New Living Translation. Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him." King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem. He called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of the religious law and asked, "Where is this Messiah supposed to be born?" "In Bethlehem in Judea," they said, for this is what the prophet wrote. "And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah. For a ruler will come from you, who will be the shepherd for my people Israel." Then Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them the time when the star first appeared. Then he told them, "Go to Bethlehem and search carefully for this child. And when you find him, come back and tell me so I can go and worship him too." After the interview, the wise men went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was born. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with his mother Mary. They bowed down and they worshipped him. Then they opened their treasure chests and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. When it was time to leave, they returned to their own country by another route, for God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod.
Thank you. Trick question. How many wise men were there? We don't know. There could have been 2 or 3 or a dozen. The song says 3 kings, but the text doesn't. It tells us of 3 gifts, but not how many wise men there were. We make a big deal about Christmas. What's surprising is that on the whole, the Gospels don't. Luke, Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of John don't even mention it. And Luke gives us the stories of angels, the angel coming to Elizabeth and then to Mary, and then to the shepherds. And in Luke, we read the story of Mary and Joseph finding no room, and Jesus is laid in a manger, where the shepherds find the newborn child. Matthew gives us none of that. There's Joseph's dream, who says it's okay that Mary is expecting a child, even though they're not married yet. And then there's one line. At the beginning of chapter 2, Jesus was born in the town of Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. That's it. And then we have the story of the wise men, or we call them the Magi. And these came from an eastern land. They'd studied their charts and saw a star and decided it was time to make a trip with some gifts. And you have to wonder, Matthew, of all the stories you could have told, why this one? Why was this story important? It's surprising that it's there because these are pagan astrologers. And yet this story finds such a central place in our Christmas story. There's no talk of repentance or forgiveness of sins or atonement. There's nothing here about following Jesus. These were Zoroastrian priests from Media or Persia. We'd call them astrologers who studied their zodiacs and followed a star and brought gifts to worship. And then, of course, ignored the command of the king to come back and report. This story does not have a happily ever after ending. In fact, It's probably A-rated, adult-rated for violence. And the verses that follow tell of Herod, who is panicked by the thought that another king has been born, and he orders the death of all little boys 2 years and down. Mary and Joseph have been warned in a dream, so they flee to Egypt, refugees, asylum seekers. And that reminds us of another infanticide 1,300 years earlier, when Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, commanded the death of all baby boys. And it reminds us also that in both cases, the child in question, both Moses and Jesus, were saved through civil disobedience, not doing what the king had said. There's a sermon in there for sure, but that's not today's focus. Today I want to come back to the gifts. 3 gifts for baby Jesus, and I'm going to suggest 3 gifts for us for 2020. I need to give credit. I got the idea for this message from a Christmas letter we received several years ago. Jerry Ediger, who's a former retired prof at CMU, mentioned in his Christmas letter just a couple of sentences about a devotional he was planning to give at Donwood Manor. And so the idea came from him. The sermon, I'll take credit or whatever for that. I'd like us to think for a moment about why the Magi. If we ask why Matthew included the story, we also ask why the Magi chose those 3 gifts. Gold, frankincense, myrrh. What did the Magi mean by them? What did Matthew think they meant? What meaning can we deduce from those 3 gifts, and is there meaning for us today? And so I'm going to suggest some things, and then you can decide whether this is the appropriate use of this text or not. All right? So, 3 gifts. The first gift, gold. Gold, of course, means wealth. It also meant royalty. A gift truly fit for a king, right? What kind of a king did the Magi imagine this child would become? We learn that this king will not be like other kings who raise taxes and live in luxury while the people make do with whatever they can scrape together. This king is not a brutal tyrant, as the Herods of the world were then, and the rulers of the world today sometimes are, killing journalists and impoverishing the people in order to build their own empires. This King Jesus comes as a Prince of Peace, a King of Peace, devoting his life and his death to making peace. First of all, peace with God. Just yesterday I read about an older woman who bumped her shopping cart into the shelf, and a whole bunch of display dishes came crashing down. And so there she was in the aisle, kneeling down, trying to pick up the broken pieces. And another person got down and tried helping her. And then the store manager came and knelt down beside her and said, "Just let's leave this. We'll clean it up." And she said, "But don't I have to pay for all these dishes?" And he said, "We have insurance for that. In the meantime, let's get you to the hospital to bandage up the cut on your hand." When we kneel among the broken pieces, and God comes and says, "We've got insurance for this. This has been paid for. Let's get you healed up." What a gift. Peace with God. But then there's living at peace with ourselves. Can you imagine living at peace with your past, your history, your family of origin? Living at peace with the wounds and the tragedies that you've accumulated over the years. Imagine living at peace with the direction your life has taken, the opportunities that you missed, the opportunities you'll never get, the disappointments, the failures, your sin, your shame. Imagine all of this being laid to rest in peace. I saw a sign that says, we often say, rest in peace. What if we could live in peace? Could we lay to rest all the stuff of our lives and live in peace, the gift of peace that Christ came to bring? And so whatever happens, whatever dishes we happen to break, we are held in the loving presence of God by this Prince of Peace. A place of peace so deep that the storms and the turmoil on the surface of our lives can't touch it. And then thirdly, imagine living at peace with your neighbors, your boss, your co-workers, some members of your family, your fellow church members, your parents, your kids, your spouse, the person who hurt you most deeply. Imagine laying down our weapons of anger and resentment, our words, our cold silence. Several years ago, about this time of year, I woke up one morning remembering and praying for someone whom I hadn't seen or heard from in years. Things had ended badly between us, and I don't think I sinned against him, but I did make some difficult decisions that affected him and his family. And so I was praying for him, and I wondered how things had turned out for him and for them. At this point, I didn't even know where he was. Well, with Google and Facebook, you can find people. So I wrote a short email telling him that I regretted how things had turned out, and I hoped he was doing well, and I wished him God's blessing for the coming year. Send. What I got back was a most gracious response. He was living in Europe, writing his next book. Their kids had grown up and were doing well. He said he still treasured some memories that we had of our time together and wished me a happy new year as well. That's the gift of God, the King who brings peace. Peace that's deeper than the turmoil of our lives, peace that reaches out and builds bridges. If we receive this as a gift, it's a good gift for re-gifting, right? For passing it on to someone else. And what if we could share this peace that we've received with someone else? And right now you can probably think of someone that you could build a bridge of peace with. What's the first thing you would do? What's the first thing you'd do to be at peace with your own self? Is there something with respect to peace with God that you need to do, some response? What a great gift. Second gift, frankincense. Frankincense is, well, it's incense. It's used by priests in the temple, and it points, if gold points to Jesus as king, then frankincense points to Jesus as our priest. Priests are people in the middle, right? With one hand they reach up to God, and with the other hand they reach out to other people. Reaching to God on behalf of these people, and then reaching out to these people on behalf of God. Isn't that what Jesus did? Right? Our high priest. And so this is our second gift for 2020. Jesus is still our high priest. Romans 8:34 says, Christ Jesus is the one who died for us and was raised to life for us and is sitting at in the place of highest honor next to God, pleading for us. We've got a whole bunch of prayers on the wall. and they're reminders to pray for each other. This text tells us that Jesus knows every one of those prayers and is holding them up to God. And prayers that we didn't get to the wall, but held inside, Jesus sees those too and is lifting them up to the Father. Is that a gift or what? Is that a gift or what? And here's the thing. It's also a gift we can pass on. We talk about the priesthood of all believers, and sometimes we think that means one person, one vote. What it means is that you are one who reaches to God and reaches to someone and pleads with God on behalf of this person and speaks to this person on behalf of God's mercy and grace. We're priests to one another. One day, Merrill and I were walking down our street, and a man came toward us who was clearly in distress. And so we talked to him, and he'd been drinking, but he was also in deep grief because the woman that treated him like a mother in his life, all his life, had just died. And without her, he didn't know how he would go on. And he was a mature man, but this woman had meant so much to him. And so what could we do? And so I asked whether it would be okay if we would pray for him. And so I moved closer to him, and Merrill hung back a little bit. He said, "You too, Mama, I need your prayers." So we, right there in the street side, on the sidewalk, we put our hands on him and we prayed for him, that God would comfort him some way, and that God would be with him today and in the days to come and give him strength for the days ahead. That's what we mean by the priesthood of all believers. And we can do that for each other. Later on, after the communion, we're doing communion this morning, obviously, and afterwards, we're going to have a chance to pray with and for each other. And we're going to ask people if they want to come forward, and Terry will be here, and I'll be over here, and you can pray with us. Or you can just stay where you are, and someone will come and pray with you and for you. And I'm going to suggest at the end of this year, just as we face a new year, here's an opportunity. Let's not miss it. Let's take the opportunity. The people who are with you, they'll stay. They'll wait for you. So, second gift, Christ our priest who is praying for us. That brings us to the third gift, the gift of myrrh. Myrrh is an embalming spice. It was used to prepare a body for burial, which is really surprising. Like, who brings funeral spices to a baby shower? But let me ask this question. Could you worship a God who did not understand suffering? Could you worship a God who serenely hovers above the chaos and turmoil and suffering of our world, untouched by any of it, oblivious, just living in absolute splendor, never engaging with the world that we live in? The gift of myrrh reminds us that Jesus has not abandoned us to our own devices. There's a song in our hymn book. We don't sing it too often, but we should sometime. "Oh, love that will not let me go." What kind of love refuses us to let us go, even if it means taking on all our griefs and our sorrows? Even in our most difficult situations, our most painful moments, Jesus is with us in our suffering. There's not a moment when we're alone. The gift of suffering love. Some of you know that gift. You have shared it. This is a difficult gift to share. to walk with others in their pain, not to let people go, bearing some of the burden. That's a rare and a costly gift, but a precious gift it is. So then, there's our three gifts for 2020. The gift of peace with God, with ourselves, with others. The gift of a priest who prays for us. And the privilege of being priests to each other and to those around us. And the gift of suffering love that never lets us go.